Okay, hello everybody and welcome to a very special edition of the Pubcast from the Brit and Yankee. And I have to say this is our second go around of segment 1 because some silly ass forgot to press record. However, we're in good shape now. Welcome, this is Pubcast 368 and this is all about wild ales. And who are we doing it with? Well, I'll tell you who we're doing it with. We're doing it on Zoom because our two guests are down in Florida. However, my co-host, who says he knows very little about wild ales, so that's going to be interesting because he knows about brewing, is Mr. Chuck Fort, who's a senior brewing consultant from Church Street Brewing in Itasca. Hello, Chuck. How the hell are you?
I'm doing pretty good. Hello.
Hello, Chuck. Well, what are you drinking, by the way?
Bock. I'm drinking a Bock, not a Doppelbock, not a Maibock, not anything, just a Bock. It's our 9th anniversary beer.
Bishop Bock, right?
Yep, Bishop Bock.
I'll tell you what I'm drinking. I'm drinking a Saison, and it's from Roaring Table, brewed by Mr. Lane Fearing, and it's called Beth, which is his good lady wife. And it is absolutely fantastic. It's not wild, however. So let's see if we can find out some guys. Bring in our special guests from Florida who know about wild ales. First of all, it's somebody who's a returning fellow on our show, the Director of Operations of Barrel of Monks Brewing down in Boca Raton, or Boca Raton, I don't know. It's Mr. Kevin Abbott. Hey, Kevin, how you doing?
An honor and a privilege to be here, gentlemen. I love being in the pub. I love every second we get to spend together.
What are you drinking, Kevin?
I am drinking an odd breed ale called La Temporada, which is a tequila barrel-aged wild ale. It is over 2 years old at this point and drinking splendidly.
Fantastic. And how convenient that you're drinking that, because a very special guest, live from Pompano Beach, which is where the brewery is, Odd Breed Ales, wow, what a coincidence, is Mr. Matt Manthe, and he is the mind behind all these fantastic wild ales, and also the winner of a gold medal at this year's Great American Beer Festival, GABF 2021, and you won it for the wild ale category. And what did you win it with?
So it was the mixed culture Brett beer category. They've got a couple of Brett categories. The mixed culture Brett category is basically Brettanomyces with souring bacteria, which is in all of our beers. The beer that won is called Oddities and Outliers Blend 2.
What are you drinking?
Right now, I am drinking Illusion. This is a wild IPA that was brewed more or less like a typical IPA, but it was fermented exclusively with our mixed culture of wild yeast and bacteria, and then 16 months in French oak barrels.
Wow, 16 months. That's a long time to wait for an IPA. So I have a question. I'm going to ask it now. I've always been told that IPAs lose their hop characteristics if you don't drink them within, a certain amount of time. Now, triples may be different, because they're not really around the hops. That's at least what I think. How can you maintain a hop characteristic for 16 months in an IPA?
Yeah, so that's a great question. It's definitely not a typical IPA. It's brewed more or less like an IPA, with the focus being on hop aroma and flavor as opposed to bitterness. So the IBUs are only about 35, so relatively light for an IPA. But really, the secret ingredient, if I were to give it away, is our yeast culture. It's Brettanomyces. So Brettanomyces acts as a natural preservative. It's constantly scavenging oxygen. Oxygen, is really one of the biggest, if not the biggest, enemies of beer. Whether it be beer that's aging or beer that's already in its package. But Brettanomyces can live for several years, if not even decades, under the right conditions. And it will continue to scavenge the oxygen, which helps to preserve that hop flavor. But it also helps to create new flavors that you can't really taste in a typical IPA. This beer it's got a lot more going on than just the hops. To some people that have never had a beer like this, which is probably most people. Some of them say, this isn't an IPA, coffee, but it's got all these other flavors going on. And yeah, that's true. But I decided to call it a wild IPA because, like I said, it is essentially brewed like an IPA. It's the fermentation and aging, and then the bottle conditioning, the dry hopping process that set it apart, make it a little bit more unique.
So okay, so you're taking styles that everybody knows and making them a little wild. How does the relationship between Kevin, you in Barrel of Monks, and you, Matt, in Odd Breed Ales, how far apart is Boca Raton and Pompano Beach?
It's about 20 minutes. It's like anything. It depends on traffic down here. But it's not far. Boca's a couple towns north of me.
So how did you get the relationship going, Kevin?
Matt has been a friend and a colleague in the beer industry for a long time. We kind of started our breweries independently of one another. We were not linked in the very beginning. And I was a head brewer at a place called Funky Buddha in Fort Lauderdale as we were scaling up our operations. And Matt was our consultant. Thank you very much. Matt was our consultant. And so we formed a relationship there. It was really great for us to work together. And some years later, lo and behold, we both have our own breweries. And Matt is in his, and I really want him to describe his process of making beer because it's so interesting. But Matt produces wort at other breweries. Now at this point, pretty much predominantly at Barrel of Monks, but early on at several different breweries to bring his wort back and ferment in-house. So because we were already kind of working together and he was producing wort at our place and we knew each other, when his original partner kind of wanted to get out, it was a very easy fit for us to kind of slide in there, buy up those shares, become partners, work together, and really help each other out. It's a two-way door for information and resource sharing, distribution, a lot of the things that go really well. And also, Barrel of Monks is specifically a Belgian style brewery, a very niche. And Matt, in doing wild ales, is even somehow more niche. So I think if we ever do get any other relationships, we have to do someone that predominantly does flat, warm beers. I think we have to continually go more and more esoteric and harder to sell. I think that's my goal in life, apparently.
You mean just like an English pub? Flat warm beers. That's what.
We're a real small operation. We're our tap room, our production facility. It's 2,500 square feet. I don't have a brew house. That was done on purpose. Our slogan is flavor from fermentation, and really what we are is a fermentation space. So that's what we focus on. I still am the one that's brewing my own recipes. Right now, I'm brewing exclusively at Barrel of Monks, and I can get into that a little bit more later. But it's really a relatively minimalist product, and what I mean by that is that it's all real ingredients. I don't use any processing aids. It's a very natural product in that sense. It all has a very long shelf life, but I try to have a relatively hands-off approach when it comes to processing the beer.
Did you have a question there, Chuck?
I was just wondering if, Matt, so do you have the wort then trucked over? Is that the deal?
Yeah. So, most breweries, they buy a brew house. I leased a Silverado 1500 with and had a custom made trailer and got some of these 550 gallon stainless steel totes. So I clean sanitize my tank and my hoses the night before I brew. I bring my hoses, the tank already strapped down onto the trailer. I drive that over to Barrel of Monks in the morning. I brew my recipe, and then instead of transferring the wort into one of their tanks, I just transfer it into my tote while it's strapped down on the trailer.
And Kevin, have you ever? So Matt comes down and does his brewing there. Have you ever kind of said, is there anything we can take from you to put into our Barrel of Monks beers that might be kind of a cross collaboration sort of thing, or are you keeping it completely separate? Because your beers are very, very unique as well, and you've started doing IPAs just because you can, right?
just to prove a point, right?
Yep, right. That's it.
One of the last times we talked. So we've always done some barrel aging stuff, and we've always had some sour beers. Matt does. If there's one thing that working with Matt has taught me is that if you're going to do something, do it right and do it, to the fullest, your fullest of ability. A lot of our sour beers we do through lactobacillus. We do through some barrels that have picked up some wild yeast. We don't have at this point a house mix culture like Matt does, and where we can really, really control it. We can be on top of it. We can specialize in it. So we'll do a couple sour beers throughout a year, and we've leaned on Matt for some guidance in doing some treatments and doing some second or third fermentations on specialty beers. But honestly, unless you take the time and effort and put a beer in barrel for 9 to 16 months and have the right mixed yeast culture and take it out when it's ready and really learn how to manipulate, how to use it, have the right equipment for it, you're going to make mediocre sour beers. And I think we've made some pretty good ones over the years, but we certainly don't specialize in it. And nor do we have a desire to really do that. We have a desire to continue it kind of down our road. We've done a couple collaboration beers. We call them the Barrel of Funk series. And we even started doing those before we started working together exclusively. So we'll have something like that will come out in the future.
Now you're 4 years into your brewing cycle, I guess, or your brewery. Are you at a position where you've got beers that are now 2 years old, as you talked about, and now you're going to have beers that are consistently that age?
It kind of depends on what I'm going for, because I do a lot of blends as well. And so, for example, the beer that we just won the gold medal for at the Great American Beer Festival, it's a blend of 3 beers. They're all brewed and fermented very differently. The oldest portion of that beer is right at about 4 years old right now. I brewed it before we opened. So I mean, it's some of our beers really are designed for aging that long. I brew certain beers with the intent of aging them up to or even a little bit longer than 3 years. There are other beers that will be the same recipe, but I'll brew them just slightly differently, and those will be ready to blend, after a year or so. Most of the beers that I make, though, I'm aging between 1 and 3 years.
You're aging them in barrels?
That's right. Yeah. So everything that we produce is aged in barrels.
Do the barrels do they tend to evaporate? You get a lot to evaporation?
I do. So I top them off typically after about a year. If it's a beer that I'm planning to age for 2 years or more. If it's a beer that I'm planning to age for a year to a year and a half or so, I typically do not top those off. I should also mention that I use primarily puncheons.
What the hell is a puncheon?
So a puncheon is basically a larger than normal barrel. So our puncheons are 500 liters because they're constructed in France. Everything is metric. But that's 132 gallons. So whereas a typical wine barrel is usually 59 gallons, a typical whiskey barrel is 53 gallons. So it's a bit bigger than a typical barrel. The reason that I'm using these larger barrels is, for one, they have thicker staves. 2, they let less oxygen inside the barrel. There's a slower ingress of oxygen that's beneficial for a number of reasons. But also those larger barrels, they do result in less evaporation. And in my opinion, they result in better beers that have softer flavors. So while I still blend a lot of the beers that I make, probably about 2/3 of the beer that I make is unblended. I make a lot of different beers, but for the most part, I have certain beers where I'm targeting, where I say, okay, this one's, going to be ready after 14 to 18 months in barrels, or this one's going to need, 2 to 2.5 years. And, for the most part, that seems to work out okay in those larger barrels, whereas I do still occasionally use some standard size wine barrels, and those are less predictable. The product coming out of them is less consistent. They still make great beer, but I really prefer using the larger barrels.
There's a lot of breweries throughout the U.S. that make these kind of beers. There's less and less that only make these kind of beers, I would say. And you have a lot of breweries, in the old world in Europe that have kind of pioneered these styles. And I will say one of the things I'm most proud of is that when we get people that really know the Cantillons of the world, that understand the complexity, the timelessness of those styles, they drink Odd Breed and they say this belongs in that. And I'll say that because Matt won't, most likely. But I have heard this. I've heard this from people that have traveled and been visited our brewery, Barrel of Monks from Belgium, and have drank Odd Breed beers either on bottle or on draft. And just people that are just really, really understand the styles. They're sought after. People are looking to trade for them from across the country, across the planet. And it's really nice to be connected with the brewery that takes such pride in what they do, and also that sparks such interest and passion from the beer drinker that knows when they get something, it's going to be something special. And
I'm going to put myself into that category because earlier on we were talking about the styles and what you find. I love what I call a journey beer. And I think, Kevin, you called it one with differing characteristics. A journey beer for me is something when I take the first taste, I get first impression. Then the second one, I get something different. The third one, okay, I kind of know what this beer is all about. But then as I continue to sip it, I still get differing flavors. And, unfortunately, my taste buds are requiring stronger flavors as I get older. But some beers really are just a joy to drink. Yeah, and we talk about on the podcast leather chair and cigar beers, and they're typically those heavy-duty imperial stouts and bourbon barrel aged, the ones that you want to sit down at the end of the evening and you want to really kind of consume it slowly. Well, Matt, your beers, from the very few I've had, are the beers that I want to consume slowly at any time of the evening. So I raise my glass to you and your fantastic approach to what I still got so many questions. Maybe we can come back for part two.
Part two,
yeah, absolutely. Fantastic. Matt, I can't thank you enough. Chuck, have you learnt anything?
Yes, I have.
Good. That's fantastic. So we don't have people with us at the moment, but I have a second glass. So what we always do at the end of this is I say good night from me, and Chuck says
good night from him.
And we go cheers. What a lovely clang. Cheers to Odd Breed Ales. And I also have to say thank you very much, Kevin, for setting this up. It's been an absolute honor to talk to you, Matt. And Kevin, Barrel of Monks beers are always top. Thanks very much, guys. I'm going to give you another clang. Cheers. All the best. Take care. And I'll be down there next year. Definitely. I'm coming down. Watch out. The Brit's coming.
Cheers.
Thank you, Matt.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chuck. Thanks, Kevin.
Yep.